Good morning, everybody. Hello and welcome to the fourth and final webinar of the Fit for Food webinar series titled Research and Innovation in Policymaking for Future-Proof Food Systems. My name is Matt Florakis and I'm a scientific project manager at ILSI Europe. And with our colleagues at UFIC, we have developed this webinar series as part of the project Fit for Food 2030. I will also be your moderator for today's webinar. Now, in this webinar, we will explore how Fit for Food 2030 Research and Innovation Policy Lab instrument contributes to food system transformation through fostering multi-stakeholder dialogue, co-creation, and experimentation towards toward more responsive and coherent research and innovation policy. So before we get started, I just have a couple of general announcements. For those of you on Twitter, and I know there's plenty of them now, you can follow us on FIT4FOOD2030 and tweet using the hashtag on the screen here. So hashtag Fit4Food2030 and hashtag Food2030EU. Additionally, at the end of this the presentation, we will be running a live Q&A. So question and answers, and you can submit your question and comments in the Ask a Question function within GoToWebinar. And please, if you have a specific question for one of the speakers, please be sure to write their names before the question so we can allocate the question to specific people. As you may know, all the webinars will be recorded and made available through the registration page. And without further ado, it's a great honor to welcome our first speaker, Tim Lang, who is Professor of Food Policy at City University London Centre of Policy Lab in the UK. And today he will describe the role of research innovation policy making for future-proof food systems. So Tim, I will give you the floor now. I'll make you a presenter.
Okay, yeah, now I don't know, I can show my screen.
Can you share your screen? Exactly.
Can you see my screen?
We can see your screen. Can you put it in a full presentation mode?
Full presentation mode, I can. Slideshow, that should be doing it. Is that it? Is that better?
Exactly. Yeah, it's working.
Okay. How long have I got? 10 minutes?
10, yeah, it's good.
Yeah. Okay. I have done 15, 16 slides, something like that, but I can go through them fast, but they're for you. Look, firstly, thank you very much, and this is very nice. The Fit for Food 2030 is a great project. I've been on the advisory group for it from the beginning. It's fantastic, and I'm only very sorry to speak to you now as a Brit from Brexit land, formerly Britain, but I'm a European. Look, in one slide, this is what I think research and innovation has to address in food. This is a slide I developed when I was a government commissioner 10 years ago in Britain, trying to think through what is it we want from a food system, whether we're looking at the local level, the national level, the international level, the European level. The problem we have in Europe is that we have created a food system using science and technology and innovation over the last 80 years, which made sense 80 years ago. It was the right thing to do. There was not enough food. There was a mismatch between people in cities and agriculture. And it's what in my world we call productionism. Science and innovation was let loose on agriculture to produce more. Then within 30, 40 years, we saw the consequences beginning to emerge on damage to the environment, to water, to land, to soil, to insects, to public health. Over the last 40 years, that evidence has got stronger and stronger. But in the meantime, power and influence has moved from the land to off the land. Almost all the money in food is made not by farmers and growers. If we took a blank sheet of paper, what do we want in 2020 from a food system? It's this. It has to be sustainable diets from sustainable food systems. The problem is, what do we mean by sustainable? I'm someone who works on the policy, on the politics of food, and I'm aware politicians, they think for 3 minutes before they have to go and do something else. So this was developed to be a very short summary, trying to pull together the complexity of what we now need to do for research and innovation, as opposed to just 1930s, 40s, 50s, which was just produce more food, then the price of food will come down and everyone will get happy. We now know that's no good. We have to address health, social values, quality, environment, economy, and governance. And if you look at the headlines points there, under each of those are all the complexity. And the problem we have, and where science and technology and then engineering, where research and innovation has to fit, is it tends to be chosen to deal with one issue. So if we go to the environment, a lot of money and attention going on to climate change, but not thinking enough about biodiversity. Now, more interest in biodiversity, but not thinking about the economy or about social values or about quality or culture. The problem we have to do is create a structure within which research and innovation can be socially useful. The problem is science and technology, research and innovation in Europe has basically distorted the problems of food as opposed to resolving them. That's our problem. And we know this. This meeting knows only too well all of this. The food system is already in trouble. The evidence for the last 30 years has got stronger and stronger. Ecosystem stress, the food economy is cheap, too little money, streams of money going to the wrong people, all the money being made by people at the last minute. Big amounts of money. The more you process a food, the more you make money from it. Ultra processing in Europe. Europe, famous for the Mediterranean diet, now eats more and more ultra processed foods, foods which are fat, sugary, salty, and then give us the diseases that put us into hospital. Culture. I'm a social scientist. Culture is something research and innovation has not considered enough. We now eat all the time. All the time. When I was a psychologist, we called it ad libitum. You ran rats round mazes. They could eat food whenever they want. That's what we're doing to ourselves now. And society is totally divided. Big gaps between rich and poor. Food is one of the expenditures of people, and it's also one of the indicators of that inequality. Now, we have to have some proportion here. I've talked of the last 70 years. There has been a massive period, 10,000 years of disruption from settled agriculture to where we are now. And if you look at the bottom right, technology and innovation and research has driven change, particularly in the last 250 years. And Europe was pioneers of this, as we know. But we're now in this battle that I have put in red, the clash of sources of innovation and disruption. Do we make the food system more ecological? Do we just hand it over to biotechnology? So big science, big technology. Is the science and innovation actually not on the land at all, but is all about data and control? Do we get rid of people and just have robotics? These are big choices that face Europe now, which take me back to that first slide that I showed. Now, I put this in. Some of you may know I work on food security a lot, and one of the problems is, what do we mean by food security? It means lots of different things to different people. But I've put in this slide, which is taken from a book that's just come out in Britain called Feeding Britain, which is me as a general food policy man, after 45 years of working on food policy, I decided to just look at my own country, the 5th or 6th richest economy on the planet, this strange country, but very interesting country, which has had an imperialist food system and now has been fed by Europe. Now, what is it doing? And food security can mean autarky, you feed yourself and no one else can put up borders, or it can be total trade. It can be about risks, it can be about resilience. You can defend it. This is being hosted in the Netherlands. In the Netherlands in 1944, you had a famine, which then shows up still in the health and life expectancy of the granddaughters of women who were conceived at the time. We know that how a state or a government protects or does not protect its people is a key factor. We tend to have handed over food security to market mechanisms, as we're seeing in COVID-19. The state is back, governance is back. So this is really just to remind us there are big philosophical choices. And Europe, even though Britain is no longer in Europe, we're still attached, and many of us see ourselves as European. In the EU, there are big discussions going on, rightly, the farm to fork strategy. Food 2030. These are actually philosophical questions about what you want to do with your land and what is your vision of food security. I'll leave that. Now, I spent 3.5 years of my life on the Eat Lancet report from 2016 to 2019. And essentially the evidence is so strong that meat, the top of this slide, meat is basically the big impact. Whichever way we look, whether it's at health or it's ecosystems, meat and dairy become the big impacts. We in Europe have turned the Mediterranean diet into the meat diet. The Mediterranean countries now eat vastly more amounts of meat and dairy than they did, and their dietary health profiles have changed as a result. This is global figures of the impact of meat on greenhouse gases or outcomes on land use, on energy use, on acidification and eutrophication. And however we look at it, plants, if we eat them directly, have a lower impact. In a world of climate change, of biodiversity destruction, of larger population, water use, water stress, not just from flooding, but from literally deficiencies and droughts, these are very critical issues. It's why we need to have whatever our research and innovation is, we need to apply the template, that flower shape that I put at the beginning of my talk. We have to fit whatever we're doing in research into that general picture. The background is also this. In Europe, we're on the right-hand side, the high-income countries, the lower and middle income and upper middle income countries are catching us up, as this slide shows. What is going on in the world is a nutrition transition. We in Europe went through that. We're eating more and more ultra-processed foods. On this slide in blue, I hope it's showing blue on your screens. The ultra-processed foods are in blue, the light blue, processed foods. So there's nothing wrong with processing. Putting tomatoes in a can means you can have tomatoes in the winter. But if you put salt, sugar, and fat all around it, well, it becomes ultra-processed. This is from the GLOPAN report. A very nice summary of the global transition that's going on. We in Europe are up there on the right. What we've got to do is reduce that. The goal is actually for Europe, the rich of Europe, to eat less, the poor to eat more, so that land use globally is more equitably distributed and that we don't misuse our land by essentially having inefficient production, particularly things like meat and dairy. This is about that. I'll skip it. We know the data is so strong. The Poor and Nemeczek study on the left, if anyone needed convincing, you know, unfortunately, and I used to be a beef farmer and sheep farmer, by the way, so I'm not being a crazy person. Animals have their place. The point is, we've made the space for animals bigger and bigger and bigger. We now probably need to reduce that. I give an example from my own country. Britain has 18,000 hectares of land in the top there in red, usable land of what in English we call croppable. You can take grass off it, you can grow crops on it. There's about a third of that, 6 million hectares in blue in the middle top. And then I've put in green circled. Britain only produces 160,000 hectares for horticulture. So in other words, for plants directly to us of fruit and vegetables is a very, very small proportion. We grow a lot of cereals. Half of that, about a third to a half of that, is fed to animals who are inefficient. We've got to rethink the relationship between humans, plants, land, space, animals. So that's from my country. If I go to the Netherlands, for example, where this is being hosted from, the horticulture is far, far bigger, but intensive. Carbon auditing of that and water auditing for the Netherlands is a particular issue. So countries need to do their own, and regions within countries need to do their own audits. Now, what are we going to do about this? I'm coming to the end of my talk. I'm a social scientist interested in policy making and what do the decision makers of the food system do to contribute to shaping research and innovation to try and address this problem. And I run through these very quickly. One strand of policy thinking is basically appeal to reason, inform consumers, label people, label foods. But I don't know anyone who has managed successfully to label against the 6 criteria of health, environment, social, environment, etc. I put in my flower shape. I think we've got to develop that, actually. If there's one thing that I would really like to do, it would be to try to assume people are rational. They're not, actually, but to try to address how are we going to do this better? Because at the moment, consumers are completely in the dark. Well, not completely. They're getting better educated about these complexities, but they're not given the means to do anything. They go into a shop, the shop price signals say buy, 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 and then they get a little bit of health education from a government or from dietitians. We've got to rethink this. Option number 2, option B, is just leave it to industry. Don't worry about consumers. Let what we call in English choice editing. Let the choice be edited by industry. Only industry has enough control. They are the gatekeepers between the supply and consumers. Can we do that? Well, they're not doing it particularly well at the moment. All the indicators are getting worse still. But that said, I'm someone in our centre at City University in London. We don't take money from the food industry, but we talk a lot to industry, but we don't do research work for industry. We want to be independent. I think there are some very good people doing interesting things in industry, but the change is not big enough. If you look at and follow the circular economy strategy, it's partly hinted at in Fit for Food 2030, that's interesting. It thinks of food, as I put here, food as material. It's a biological and material entity. We get the food, we eat it, we excrete it, then what happens? Is anyone doing research and innovation on recycling human waste? Because it's a vast waste factory that goes into the sea, pollutes, or we have to then have very expensive ways of taking the pollutants and the nutrients, excess nutrients out. A circular economy will be one where, if I may say, human shit wasn't wasted. There is a vast rethink of sewage and water, not just water to grow plants, and to water for us, but water that comes out of it. So the circular economy thinking, I think, is one of the most interesting areas in research and innovation, but it's not thinking about culture. I talk a bit with the Ellen MacArthur Foundation and others in this. It's very interesting, but it appeals to industry because it can be done in closed loops. How do you do that at a cultural level, at a societal level? I think that's big thinking, big engineering is needed there. We obviously have a lot of money goes into this, just seeing the answer as high tech. Everything we do, okay, meat's a problem, let's have lab-based meat. Let's substitute. Okay, biodiversity is a problem. Well, let's do synthetic biology. Let's have industrial insects to feed in industrial fish. Let's carry on with more subtle and better modification of genes. Let's have robotics. Let's nutrigenomics. In science, we love that. We love high tech. Okay, is it dealing with culture? No. Is it dealing in that systemic way? Not enough, actually. I'm a skeptical, fascinated critic of the high-tech approach for research and innovation. Option D is actually what's going on at the moment, which is waiting for crisis, waiting for implosion. There is a big argument in public health, as you probably know, that here we've got with COVID-19 a reminder to industrial European food capitalism, because that's what we're talking about, that actually it's ignored public health other than just, if I eat this food product, I don't want to die from that food product, and the manufacturer doesn't want to see me die from that product, so they want to make it safe. That's not the same thing as having an ecosystem which is safe. And there's still arguments going on about where has COVID-19 come from, but the big theory, as we know, is it comes from wild animals jumped through to humans from consumption. But waiting for crisis is a bad strategy in policy, but unfortunately that's what happens. Europe didn't sort out its food system until Second World War reminded us that we had to do it. Britain wasn't in the common market when it began, but everywhere was doing the same sort of thinking of saying, we've got to sort out food and farming. So my argument is about COVID-19, not that's what we're talking about, is it's yet another wake-up call that we have to get a better food system in Europe. The track record of waiting for crisis as a policy strategy is bad. Option E is, I think, probably the shortest and quickest one, which is reframe choice, not just choice editing by companies, but we've got to have a culture which sees choice change as important. In Brexit land, formerly Britain, our Prime Minister got coronavirus. He was 17.5 stone. Obesity is a risk factor in survivability of COVID. And interestingly, now there's a commitment to try and do something about obesity. They won't treat it seriously yet because they don't want to do this. This is a strategy known as the Nuffield ladder of intervention from the Nuffield Council on Bioethics. The bottom rung, it's a ladder. The more you get more effective, the higher up this ladder you go. Doing nothing at the bottom through to, I don't know if you can see it, eliminate choice. Can you see that better now? If you eliminate choice at the top. Europe has been more the sort of second and third rung from the bottom. We haven't actually at the European level moved up. That's partly because health is a devolved responsibility. So in health terms, it's been weakly and badly dealt with. It's only labeling, and I've been critical about what we've done in Europe at the labeling level. I spent 15 years working partly on trying to get QID, in quantitative ingredients declaration labeling. So a label in Europe, the biggest ingredient is the first one. So if it's water that's there, has to say 40%. Took us a long time. Have we got time to get sustainable food labeling? I think we've got to do it very fast, and I think we could do it if we wanted to. So that, as if we move up that ladder, it becomes more effective. So if I move that back again, no, I'll leave that there. I don't know whether you can see that still. basically, I think what we need in Europe is sustainable dietary guidelines. I think there's research to do on that. What would they look like? How could they be? That needs a policy process. So it's not probably what those of you who want to do research and innovation on it, but it's probably the most important thing we could do at the European level. And we've got to engage with the public. Public engagement is critical. And there is some very interesting work going on around the world of what is the most effective way of getting fast engagement with the public, citizens juries, citizens conventions, citizens assemblies, public events, messaging. There is a lot of research and innovation on that social side that I think has to guide the tech stuff, the techie stuff. So where are we? Am I there? Next one. So what's stopping us doing it? Well, it's the usual things: history, economics, lack of guidance. But I think at the European level, there's some really interesting coming together of this thinking. And in this crisis, I think those of you in the European Union still, you must put the pressure on, support the Commission, work with good people to try and get this done. I think the COVID-19 crisis is an opportunity to do that. And I think the second bullet from the bottom is a critical issue in our experience as policy analysts at our center, is if you have health people and science of behavior people and engineering people not talking to each other, you're then divided. There's no unified thoughts. And in Britain, we're trying more and more to get common academies of science to talk together. And to have a common position on things. That way you get faster translation of evidence into policy. And obviously, no country on its own can do this, but I could speak to you from Brexit land, where we've decided we can't decide what we want. A cult basically won a political argument, and now Britain is in a very dangerous position. So I hope we're not going to cause you more trouble, but that's my problem as a Brit. Conclusions. What can we do? Talk and discuss like this. And I was asked to do this talk, and I've pitched it deliberately at this big level rather than the micro level. We've got to have these sort of discussions. They're really good. That's why I said, and I meant it, I'm very honored and delighted to be doing this. We need cross-sectoral alliances. We have to make our governments work for us. They can't just say, leave it to the market. We've got to reframe markets. There's no point just saying market economics. What sort of market? Who? With what goals? Who's going to win and lose? But I come back, my last point, my opening slide, that flower, is what in policy terms we call a multi-criteria analysis. So you can't just say cheap food is good, or healthy food is good, or safe food is good, or high-tech food is good. We've got to have a multi-criteria approach to food. So there we are. That's me done. And if you wanted to, well, the Lancet report is there at, I think, in the top 10 most highly cited science papers of recent years. And my new book is there, Feeding Britain, but that's all about Britain, but it's about how do we deal with this complexity. And some of the thinking was sketched in a book 3 years ago with an ex-student of mine, Pamela Mason, a nutritionist, with the paintings of the plants there by my wife. Okay, so thank you very much. I hope that was okay. And I think you've been seeing a nice view of my ceiling of my study. That's because the other camera didn't seem to be working. Okay, that's me done. Bye.
Thank you, Tim, for the very nice presentation. I have to say that I actually read your previous book and it was really, really interesting. So I highly encourage the audience to get that book, and I will try and get the new one as well. I'm sure it's very interesting. So just a reminder, if you have specific questions for Tim, please submit them through the chat and add his initial at the beginning. So we can address the question to him. And if we don't have the time to answer those questions at the end, there will be written answers on the website, so we can have the answers to those questions written. So our next speaker is Chrissie Brierley. She's the Deputy Coordinator of JPI Healthy Diet for Healthy Life, and she's also Project Officer for the FIT4FOOD2030 project at Zoom MW. And today she will introduce the Fit4Food Policy Lab concept. So I'm going to give her the floor now.
Yeah.
Just give me a second. It seems like I can't share my screen though, so give me just a second because I have small difficulties here. Sorry. Sorry, if you give me 1 second, I will figure out why I can't share my screen, which is a bit. Just give me a second. Okay, sorry, we have just a technical issue with sharing screen, so give me just 1 second. I need to sorry. Chrissie, I'm going to put you on the spot. Do you have by any chance your presentation ready on your laptop?
Hang on. I do.
Sorry about that.
Let me see if this works. I don't want that.
And it works. So if you can just put your full mode presentation mode.
Yeah. No, I cannot, because then I lose my notes. So if you can't share your screen, then it's going to have to be me in the other version.
Okay. Okay. So
sorry about that, but
no, it's fine. Up. Okay. So we're gonna make it. It's gonna be okay. We have a lot of fun. And now.
Yeah.
You should have control, and you should be all okay to go. Great. Sorry about that. Chrissie, you have the floor.
Hang on. Yeah, okay. I have to do it like that. Okay, never mind. Thanks for the introduction, Matt, and for the great introduction also, Tim. Yeah, so my name is Chrissie Brierley, and Matt already explained a little bit about who I am and what I do. So I'm the Deputy Coordinator of the Joint Programming Initiative, A Healthy Diet for a Healthy Life, and through the JPI HDHL, as it's also known, we are part of the FIT4FOOD2030 project, and we coordinate the Policy Labs. And it's the Policy Labs I'm going to give you an introduction to today. So maybe to start with the first and possibly obvious question, what is a policy lab? The concept already existed before Fit4Food, and in essence, a policy lab, or a policy innovation lab as it's also called, aims to tackle complex public problems or societal challenges that more traditional government structures are not managing to solve in the current situation. And they are set up as participatory and experimental space in which diverse stakeholders work together to develop and, where possible, test novel policy and approaches. This participatory and experimental space, it should be seen as a series of interrelated and interactive sessions with dedicated topics and methods. So it's the structure in which policy innovation can take place. And a policy lab in this sense that we mean should also have direct connections to the public policy arena. So elsewhere within a company or within your local sports club, you could have something and call it a policy lab, but that's not what we mean by this. It should be connected to public policy. Then we go, okay, so quite a lot about this has already been said. Which problems are we dealing with? It was covered in the previous webinars, and Tim already also said quite a bit about it. So I'm not going to stick too long with this. Our food systems face complex and persistent problems. We say research and innovation can and should be a catalyst for transformation of the food system to being healthy, to being sustainable, equitable, all those things. But RRI has some problems of its own, such as fragmentation into disciplines and little support for interdisciplinary or transdisciplinary research. There's very low involvement of citizens, consumers, end users, For example, there tends to be an emphasis on open calls, fundamental research, which can make it difficult to address specific societal challenges. And there isn't always a good connection between the needs of the thematic policymaking and the way that we fund and carry out research. So in order for RRI to have more impact on the transition of the food system, we also need to innovate our RRI systems, which is where FIT4FOOD2030 and in this case the policy labs come in, because we present the policy labs as an instrument in order to make RRI systems more impactful on the food system's transition. So yes, there we go. RRI policy labs in FIT4FOOD. So for the purpose of FIT4FOOD, the policy labs are RRI policy labs. They work at a national and sometimes a regional level, and the goal is to increase the impact of RRI on making food systems future-proof, as I just said. They do this by building a network of diverse stakeholders and really making a point of also including the unusual suspects who would normally not be involved in policy discussions. And together, these stakeholders analyze the current food system and related RRI landscape. They define barriers and opportunities, and they work on making RRI policy more coherent if necessary. So really aligning RRI policy if this comes out of their analysis, but also on innovating RRI policy. Central aspects of this policy lab process should be a holistic, systemic approach and responsible research and innovation, or RRI. And by a holistic approach, we mean to take into account the food system as a whole, with all its different aspects, so agriculture and food processing, but also logistics and nutrition and health and food waste. And this means that the stakeholders involved should also come from different parts of the system, both in terms of the area they work in, but also their type of role, such as policymakers, researchers, farmers, people who work in industry, and again, consumers. But you could also think of involving lawyers or behavioral psychologists in order to really get that full breadth of expertise and that systemic approach. Sorry if it's taking, I have to switch between screens in order to get the right slide on. So yeah, this is just a little bit about responsible research and innovation. What do we mean by this? The systemic approach and the involvement of different stakeholders and end users is very central to responsible research and innovation, which aims to make the way that we conduct research more diverse and inclusive, open and transparent, anticipative and reflexive, and responsive and adaptive. There you have all of them. Making it better equipped to solve social issues and also to have a strong support base in society. And Tim just also spoke a little bit about that and how important that is in order for us to move forward. So that brings us to, so I'm now having mouse issues. Yeah, so how did we start in FIT4FOOD? The project started on the 1st of November 2017, and we started setting up the policy labs through an open call in late 2017, and this was disseminated via the consortium network, the partners in FIT4FOOD. We were aiming to start with a first group of 5 labs, but there was so much interest that we decided to start with 7, so that was great. And we recruited a second group of policy labs at the start of 2019, which resulted in another 4 policy labs, which means we ended up with 11 instead of the 10 that had originally been foreseen. And the criteria to run a policy lab were commitment letters from at least 2 relevant ministries to try and really ensure from the start that holistic approach. And the applicants, so the ministries in this case, needed to provide 2 people to act as national policy lab coordinators with their own funds to show commitments to the project. Ideally, these coordinators should work in policymaking, for example, at one of the ministries or a closely related institution. In case we had more eligible applicants than we could accept, geographical spread also became a factor. Yes, there we have them. So these are our 11 policy labs. The first group, Flanders, Hungary, Italy, Lithuania, the Netherlands, Norway, and Romania. As you can see, 6 countries and 1 region. And then in the second group of 4, Austria, Basque Country, Estonia, Ireland, we have 3 countries and 1 region again. And the policy labs are part of what we call the Food 2030 platform, which connects the local level through the city labs in Fit for Food, the national and regional level through the policy labs, and the European level through the Fit for Food EU think tank, which you can all see on this lovely map here. And the EU think tank, of which Tim is a member, it consists of high-level experts, and it forms a linking pin between the labs and the wider project on the one hand, and the European Commission on the other. Okay, so once we had our 7 policy labs at the start, what were they supposed to do? And we now come to this general structure of the policy lab with its series of interrelated meetings with dedicated topics, as I said at the start, which is what you see here. What you are looking at in this policy lab honeycomb graph is in the blue, sort of the overall process that the labs go through. And then in the light green are the themes for the 4 meetings with the stakeholder network that are foreseen in the project. And in the dark green, you see the training and learning sessions that the project provides to the lab coordinators in order to prepare them for their role and to support them throughout the project. So what does this all mean? We go to the first phase or meeting. So system awareness and analysis, and what we mean by that is having understanding first of the food system, understanding of the main challenges and the knowledge questions of the key players of the food system, and to begin making an overview of the existing research agendas and the research programs that are relevant to this on the national level or the regional level, depending also on how research is organized. And also to think with that initial group of stakeholders that you have together there, who are we missing, and to try and add those, of course, to the network. Then we go to future outlook and agenda setting, which is very much discuss and agree upon a collective vision of the food system. Within Fit for Food, we think this is very important to have kind of like everyone facing in that same direction and to have something that you can go back to but this is what we envision for the future. So how can we get there? You make an assessment of the RRI landscape. This could be done, for example, by a SWOT analysis, and you draft or you begin to draft a roadmap to improve the RRI landscape and to work towards your vision or the ultimate goal. And then in phase 3 or meeting 3, experimentation and innovation. So deciding on promising ideas and how to put these into action during within the project that was about 12 months. This could be different ways of funding research to stimulate a systems or an RRI approach. Better connecting regional and national activities, a plan for multi-stakeholder collaboration to develop a research program, policy brief, etc. Taking into account, of course, the work from the earlier meetings and the input generated by the project outside of the policy labs, that is, but also quite important, agreeing on expectations, indicators, monitoring, and how can the outcome of this experiment contribute to a sustainable change in food systems, RRI. The idea is in this phase to really help the labs from talking to doing and to put something into action during the time span of the project, if possible. This can be about the content of the research, but also about how research is conducted and trying to solve barriers in the RRI system. So, for example, offering financial incentives for inter or transdisciplinary research. And it's good to remember that the lab in itself is often already an experiment. Then in phase 4, which is continuity and legacy, the labs will evaluate what has been done, what has the impact been, and what are the lessons learned, but also if and how the work of the lab will continue. So addressing questions like what will happen to the stakeholder network and are there structures that the lab can be embedded in. I think it's good to mention here that this structure is necessarily quite abstract and really a general outline, as the local context and the starting points of the different labs are very different. So for each lab, there is a high degree of figuring out their own path and being responsive and adaptive along the way based on how things develop, which can be both a blessing and a little bit of a curse sometimes, but there you go. You have to do something new to get somewhere. Okay, so that was the theory, which the Policy Lab coordinator then had to put into practice. This started with building the stakeholder networks, and obviously they mostly started with their own network, the network of their organization, and then snowballed from there. Some deliberately started with a small group of stakeholders, and others started straight away with casting the net very wide, so different strategies there. And sometimes, in order to reach certain stakeholder groups, Policy Lab meetings were organized back-to-back with other events, such as an industry conference, which could work very well sometimes. So in these first meetings on systems awareness and analysis, we saw that the identified strengths varied a lot. So, for example, as you see on the slide, the participants mentioned good food safety, food system based on tradition, good recycling of materials, and trust between actors. So very good if they, in fact, already had that. And maybe unsurprising, there were much more commonalities in the weaknesses and challenges, such as lack of sustainable or circular production, issues with food waste, lack of cooperation between actors, low involvement of consumers. And here, where is my cursor? There we go. Here you see a brief example of the impression of the types of participants that were there. We asked the coordinators to put into this little matrix after the meeting. And if we go to the second meetings, visioning and drafting of the roadmaps. So this was about developing the collective visions. We see here a lovely example of what came out of that. So this is a visual of the vision of the Hungarian Policy Lab, working towards 2030. And then here's an overview of RRI factors that hinder or support the vision. In the third meetings, the labs talked about this idea of experimentation and innovation. So if and how they might be able to put some of the opportunities they identified or pathways to impact into practice. So some of the labs launched or are planning to launch food system calls, innovative food system calls. For example, in the Netherlands, a sandpit call was launched for the transition of the food system, and other labs are working on research agendas or policy briefs. And I've given some examples here of identified priority areas or missions, such as you see here on the slide. So the principles of circular economy come back throughout the food landscape. We are striving for a climate neutral food system. We are taking nutrition research to the next level. And here a different example from a different lab. Appreciation of the production, agricultural farmers' role, opportunities for developing generational relief, the social organization change, multi-level governance, and regulation development and application. So quite different there, so that's interesting. And again, very much dependent on that local context. So where are we now in Fit for Food and with the labs? The project will finish at the end of this year, and the labs are slowly moving into the phase of taking stock and establishing which lessons were learned. So what has been achieved, what has changed since the lab started. From the project, we are thinking along with the labs about ambitions and opportunities for continuation of the lab, or at least the work, and the stakeholder network. And we hear a strong ambition amongst the coordinators that their experiences should feed into ongoing policy developments, European policy developments, such as the implementation of the Farm to Fork strategy and also the Food Systems Partnership in Horizon Europe. Of course, we can already say something about the achievements so far. We are talking about the building of the diverse networks. The participants are generally very positive about the Policy Lab and the process. Others are asking to join. They are managing to raise awareness about the systems approach. They are connecting different existing initiatives nationally, but we've also seen examples where a lab has connected to the Horizon Europe Mission Board on soil health and food. So the launch of food system calls, as I mentioned, some have managed to get integrated food policy on agenda of the government, and input from the labs has been taken up in national strategies, gaining political support, increased contact between ministries, and some labs have also published articles about what they're doing. So also part of raising awareness. Some very good news there. But where there is achievement and success, there are also some challenges. Of course, always complexity, time, and money. We have found that the project is very complex. It takes a while for people to wrap their head around it, especially sort of this connection between the food system and food policy, and then the role of RRI that Fit for Food is about. Reaching and engaging certain stakeholders, such as consumers, health, and industry, can be quite hard. sustaining or broadening political support. I would say that these two, engaging certain stakeholders and sustaining the support, are the big ones. Those are really difficult and also very important, especially the political support. There are elections, developments, and things change. There are new people, which can make everything very difficult. And so the diversity of local context, it can be a richness, but it can also be a challenge in terms of a project and a process that you're trying to go through together. And what is the place of the lab in case of a full national landscape? Because in some countries there's actually already quite a lot going on, but there is often then there is coordination lacking. And then in some cases the policy lab has taken up that role. So it can be hard to stick to the foreseen timeline because of all these different developments going on, and sustaining the labs, which is of course something that we're working on now with them. I will skip this for now, but might be interesting to read back. What do the coordinators say about the added value of the Fit for Food Policy Lab for them? So the actual structure and within the project that we offer. And then we come to the end. Finally, we are developing a Policy Lab handbook, which will be published later this year, on how to set up an RRI Policy Lab for everyone who is interested in doing this themselves. It will include tips and tricks and lessons learned from the current labs, and we expect that a first version will be available after the summer. Thank you for listening today. I hope it was inspiring or at least interesting, and if you have any questions, please leave them in the chat.
Thank you, Chrissie, for this very nice overview of the Policy Lab. For full transparency, I have to admit that Chrissie did an amazing job because she actually didn't have the control of the presentation. So I was trying to switch the slides. So sorry again for this maybe sometime mismatch between the slides and what Chrissie was actually referring to. But I think the presentation was really nice. So thank you very much, Chrissie. And from the overview of the Policy Lab, we now go to the final speaker. Siret Talve is a scientific advisor in the Estonian Ministry of Rural Affairs, and she's also the Policy Lab coordinator of the FIT4FOOD2030 Estonian Policy Lab. And today she will basically present an overview of the work they do in the Estonian Policy Lab.
Thank you, Matt, for the floor. Now it's my task to introduce Estonian Food Policy Lab. We coordinated together with Anu from National Institute for the Health Department Development. We identified several problems before establishing Policy Lab. For example, we have this issue related to the overweight of people in Estonia, and also the reasons for that are illustrated in this slide. On the left, you see this ideal way of eating, and on the right side, you can see what is happening in practice, how the average Estonian person is eating currently. The second issue, which is important, is that the term of food system is not fully understood and considered in Estonia, and we have scattered the approaches to address food-related issues. We don't have also the common platform for all key players, and the activities are not fully coordinated between ministries. And we wanted to start to solve these problems by starting from the urgent problems that are currently on table of for ministries, and also to engage public and stakeholders in addressing these policy-related issues concerning the food system. The idea of the Policy Lab was first coming from the Ministry of Social Affairs, that is involved in the joint programming initiative Healthy Diet for a Healthy Life, and proposed to the Ministry of Rural Affairs that you could join us to establish Estonian Policy Lab. And the initial goals of the Policy Lab were identified in cooperation between our two ministries, and they were related to the establishment of effectively working network, mapping of the current food-related research and innovation landscape, and also strengthening the common understanding of activities for introducing and implementing of different EU level and local strategic documents. Currently, we have had two different events, quite large-scale events, and let's look together on the short video of about the first event. So this event was held in June 2019, and there were participating totally 37 persons. We had this organized in the framework of yearly health promotion conference. We first had the Mentimeter question hub as a heating hub for participants, where we asked what kind of food is healthy, and you can see the results here. The main issues raised were that the healthy food should be fresh, food diversity is important, and also it should be balanced. The discussions were held in discussion groups that were organized by the different food environments. We had representatives of 6 food environments that are listed here on the slide, and they made a short presentation, and afterwards there were discussion what is good, what is problems in this concrete environment, and how to solve these problems. As direct result of this first event, we got the input for the healthy diet roadmap, and we also identified the main issues related to food environment that could be now dealt by different ministries in their policy measures. They are listed here, and so they are in the fields of different ministries, as you can see. The second Policy Lab event was focused on the food waste, and we were organizing it all also so that different life cycle stages of the food chain were involved, and each life cycle stage had their own discussion groups, and also next to the entrepreneurs, the ministry officials, local government, NGOs, scientists, and also consumers were involved. Some presentations were first made again to really get this participants heated up and ideas what is going on, what the research shows, what are the issues related to the food system currently, and why and where this waste is produced. The method was built up so that we first in each group is identified the different food loss flows in each life cycle stage, and also then had discussion about the reasons why these flows are emerging. And after this discussion, when they all were mapped, also some prioritization exercise was carried out to really see what are the most important and urgent reasons of the food loss in this particular life cycle stage. And this most urgent issues were addressed by finding of solutions. This hexagons method was used to really identify the pathway, how to reach from current problem to the solution, and what are the key players and main activities on this pathway. The results were summarized into report, and the report was distributed to all involved ministries. We had in total 5 ministries represented in the event. And also this Ministry of Environment is currently elaborating Estonian National Food Waste Diminishing Roadmap, and these outcomes from the event are also used for this process. Now the plans for future, some events that we are already working on. First is this food reformulation and labeling policy that is currently on table in Ministry of Rural Affairs, and we want to elaborate relevant CAP investment measure for the new financing period, where we want to support enterprises, food processing enterprising in diminishing of salt, sugar, and saturated fatty acids in food. So we first sent out the questionnaire to the companies, and based on their results, we will kind of summarize the results and treat them, and then we organize interactive seminar to really co-design the policy support methods for the future. We also wanted to have in cooperation with Tartu City Lab event on the soil and food mission outcomes to explain to citizens what are the approaches in future, how we can achieve healthy soil that is basis for providing healthy food. But this event was cancelled because of this COVID crisis, and we are not really sure whether we can still have it in September, or what will be the future situation concerning this crisis. The other is that we are planning also in autumn is the implementation seminar on implementation pathways of farm to fork strategy that just came out at the end of the spring. And we want to really focus on this event on the social aspects of food system. We have planning it together with Ministry of Social Affairs, and there are really several issues that are mainly led by Ministry of Social Affairs, like this healthy diet, social rights of workers in food chain, and also food affordability. But this animal welfare, that is under responsibility of Ministry of Rural Affairs. So we now have discussions on the methodology and approach, how we will do this engagement of stakeholders, and what are these kind of goals of the discussions. So that are the plans. To conclude, maybe I could say a couple of words about the benefits of Estonian Food Policy Lab so far, what we have ourselves identified. So I think that important is that in our events and seminars, we have really achieved a very good discussion atmosphere, and very big support for us for that has been really this methodology provided by FIT4FOOD project that we have really actively used in our events. So we have really achieved active engagement and good cooperation in ministry and also with other ministries and stakeholders. We also see that this international network of city and policy labs is really beneficial, and the policy lab is very good discussion platform for new challenges like climate policy, biodiversity, and farm to fork strategy. And to finalize, let me just outline some main challenges. So still it is quite difficult to introduce the food system approach. We also have problems in training the group discussion leaders, explaining the methodology to the core team of the lab, because in each table this discussion should lead to follow the same approach and methodology, and it is not always very easy to achieve. We also see that the 2 years, that is quite a short time for full acceptance and recognition of the policy lab. We really feel that it would be much better to get involved already in the first wave of policy labs. Also, we have some concerns about sustainability. There are some budget cuts as a result of COVID crisis ahead next year, and it could also influence this future of the policy lab. And we also hope that after the end of the FIT4FOOD projects, the network of policy labs, the international network of policy labs will continue. So that will be really beneficial and support for sustainability of Estonian policy lab also. Thank you for your attention, and all the questions are welcome.
Thank you, Siret, for the very nice presentation. So as announced in the chat, due to the technical difficulties, we will be just adding 5 minutes Q&A session at the end. So thank you for your interest and staying with us for those final questions. So I have a quick question for Siret. Siret, are you here? Can you hear us?
Yes, I'm here.
Yes, you can. Thank you. So I have, if you can be short in your answer, I have just a question from the audience, asking you one of the main advantages of for Estonia to be running a policy lab.
You mean for specific advantages for Estonia? No,
Yeah,
I think that the specific could be that Estonia is very small. You know, we have less than 1.5 million population. That means that people still quite well know each other, and also our society is quite flexible, and it is quite easy to change, to make changes. So Estonia could be really very good for the place where to test new approaches, and yeah, I think this small society and is advantage in this sense. And also, what is concerning food is that Estonia has a lot of free land that is suitable and that is also used for organic agriculture. And this is also some specific thing that we can consider and should consider in our food discussions.
Okay, thank you very much for your answer. And now a question also from the audience for Tim. I don't know if Tim, are you here? Can you hear us?
I can hear. Can you hear me?
We can hear you loud and clear. Yeah, thank you. So we have a question from the audience. So first of all, thanking you for the fascinating presentation and asking you for advice on how to convince funders to basically fund the type of research you're presenting. And that person is mentioning that in his experience, it's very difficult to get funding for food policy research. So I don't know if you have a quick comment on this point.
Yeah, it is. You're talking to someone who's done it for 45 years. Some of the best work that I've done with colleagues has been done for nothing, to be honest, or the most influential bits of work. So in other words, working out of hours while doing a lot of teaching and PhDs and other paid research. So it's difficult, I agree. But that said, I think something very interesting is happening. Funders are beginning to see this big picture, and you're seeing a very interesting coming together of foundations to share perspectives and to begin to enter into this territory. Some of the work that Chrissie was referring to, well, this project, for example, is a sign that actually this area is beginning to open up. It has been very difficult to get funding for it, but it's less difficult than it was 40 years ago. Let me tell you, 40 years ago, it was impossible. Now it is possible, but hard. So I just think good question, but I'm more hopeful about it now than I was. I mean, our centre for food policy in London has had 3 years funding doing policy papers about integrated food policy and doing briefings about this, which has necessitated a lot of research. So, you know, we've done it actually. But is it hard? Yes, very hard. And you have to go to foundations and get small funding first, I think. And then people begin to see it when papers start coming out. So I take a long view on it. So I'm actually being rather irritating to the questioner who wanted to know now. And I'm saying, well, you have to take a long view. When, of course, in my talk, I was saying, this is urgent. We've got to do it now. So I'm afraid the most important answer I gave, a bit of my answer was, actually, we have to do it ourselves.
Okay, thank you, Tim, for the nice answer as well. So unfortunately, we're already running out of time for this Q&A session. So again, as a reminder, we will be able to answer, have written answers to the question we received, and they will be posted on our website. But for today, that's all. I once again want to thank you all our speakers, so Tim, Chrissie, and Siret, for their very nice and insightful presentations. As well for you, obviously, for joining us and staying a bit later than expected. And we are again sorry for the technical difficulties. Please do keep an eye on more exciting news from the FIT4FOOD2030 project. And you can subscribe to our newsletter and you can visit our website and all the information on the registration that you followed. And you can also watch the previous webinars of this series. As a final note, we want to invite you to tweet what you could do to help transform our local food system by using the hashtags that you now see on your screens. And you can be tweeting at Siret4Health. And we are really looking forward to hearing from you very soon. And we again thank you all for your participation. And until next time, bye from us.